One of the most common mistakes people make is trying to train for fat loss. Today, I'm gonna teach you exactly what you should do with your training when you are trying to lose weight. Before we get started, do me a huge favor, make sure you like the video, hit the subscribe button if any of my videos are helping you and you want to be alerted every single time we drop a new video, which is twice a week, and drop a comment below if I can help you in any way possible. Let's get into the video. The first thing we have to understand when it comes to fat loss is that the diet is going to make the majority of the progress for you. And what that means is that we don't want to rely on training or cardio or supplementation at all if we don't need to. We want to use those as supplements to the diet in order to lose more fat along the way. Not only that, as in the diet is more advantageous and progressive for fat loss, but it's more trackable and less adaptive than cardio. For example, when we are using cardio as a modality for fat loss, we are basing how many calories we are burning to create that calorie deficit on whatever our tracker says or whatever the treadmill we are using says, both of which are extremely inaccurate and can vary from situation to situation. So if we use macros and calories as a way to create the deficit, it is a much more accurate determination of being in a deficit. So when you're in a deficit and you're tracking it through calories, we can be 100% sure that that deficit is actually present and that we are making meaningful progress, and we can adjust that progress as we go because we have those numbers to track. Next, we have to understand the role that training actually plays during a fat loss phase. So it's not that we shouldn't train during the fat loss phase, it's that we shouldn't train for fat loss during a fat loss phase. What we should be doing is training for muscle and strength maintenance during a fat loss phase. And what this looks like is actually exactly how it looks like when you are trying to build muscle or build strength when you are not actively pursuing fat loss. So for example, if you are following an upper-lower 4-day split during your off season or your gaining phase or your maintenance period, whatever period of time it is before the diet, you can continue that exact same training program so long as you are recovering adequately while pursuing fat loss. For most general population people, this is going to be totally doable. You don't need to manipulate too many things. However, if you start training 5 or 6 days a week, then go into a fat loss phase, you may need to drop off a day of training, lower your volume, or at least lower your perceived effort in the gym, your RPE or your RIR. Last but not least, you could even lower your intensity. And by intensity, I mean the absolute intensity, which is the load on the bar. So how much weight you are actually lifting. All of these factors play a role in how hard we are pushing in the gym. They are quite literally going to contribute to the volume intensity being put into the training, and that is going to take its toll on the body and the nervous system. So when we start to diet and we create a calorie deficit, we do have less and less energy and more fatigue accumulating, which means we can't recover as good as we once did. However, there is a lot of good research showing we don't need nearly as much volume to maintain the muscle that we built as we do to actually build it. And there was actually a research study done on this specifically. They took two groups of people. They took one group that was between ages 20 to 35 and one group that was 60 to 75. Now we're gonna just assume that the age limit between them is somewhere in the middle for these ratios, which I'm gonna get to here in a sec. But what they did in this study is they took completely untrained individuals, they trained them for 16 weeks straight to accumulate a good base foundation of strength training, resistance training, and then they put them in a maintenance phase. They took the 20 to 35-year-olds and the 60 to 75-year-olds and they gave them 1/3 of their training volume and 1/9 of their training volume. What they found is that the 20 to 35-year-old resistance training individuals in the group actually could maintain all of their muscle during this maintenance period while being only in the gym for 1/9 of their volume. That is very, very little. So if you're training 4 or 5 days a week, you could probably maintain your muscle just going to the gym once or twice a week, which is pretty crazy to think about. Now, the group that was between ages 60 to 75 needed 1/3 of their volume, which makes a lot of sense because as we age, the rate of muscle protein synthesis and our ability to actually rebuild muscle tissue, as well as the increase of atrophy for muscle tissue, starts to go up. So as muscle protein synthesis goes down and our body starts to atrophy more muscle more easily, it is harder to maintain muscle, so they needed a little bit more volume in the gym to maintain what they got. So by this research study, we know we don't need a whole lot of training in order to maintain our muscle. And we can assume that the group that is between the ages of like 35 to 60, because that was the age group that they left out, which most people in the gym kind of fall into that. When I think of our client base, there's a lot of people that are in that 30 to 45 range. We're gonna assume that they're somewhere in the middle. So let's say they need 1/4 1/4 to 1/5 of their volume. Still not that much. If you're training 4 days a week, that's only 1 day in the gym. However, what I also noticed about this study was 2 things. There wasn't anything in the research study that I could find that showed that they were in a calorie deficit. So if we are considering muscle maintenance while being also in a calorie deficit, which presents itself some issues when it comes to maintaining muscle, we probably have to up the ante on that volume a little bit. The other thing to consider is your training experience. So this group only trained for 16 weeks prior, which is a good amount of time to create an accumulation phase before the study. However, there's a lot of us watching this video, and myself included, that have been training for years and years and years. So it's not 100% applicable because these people could still very well be getting their newbie gains, which makes maintaining muscle much easier. Knowing that they were not in a deficit and that they were newbie gain individuals potentially, we would probably want to say that at worst, 50% of your volume is going to maintain muscle. But nonetheless, we know now that we don't need as much volume, and the key point of training during a fat loss phase is still to maintain the muscle that we have, because when we get lean enough, when we lose the body fat, we want to see the muscle that we've earned. We don't want to get to a place where we're just smaller or skinnier. We want to look dense and athletic like most people strive for when they are creating a fat loss plan. All right, so now we know that the diet is going to play the biggest role in fat loss. And we also know that training is really just there to maintain muscle, because the truth is whether we do a strength training program or an Orange Theory training program or circuit class, whatever it may be, most likely the calorie expenditure is not going to be that great or that different across the board. So it's more useful to spend that time in the gym maintaining the muscle that you've earned and spend your time focusing on the diet to lose the fat. But there are actual activities that we can do like cardio, but not cardio, in order to stimulate more fat loss. And that's where N.E.A.T comes into play. N.E.A.T stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And this is quite literally everything we do every single day that is not purposeful or intentional activity or exercise. Me talking right now is literally N.E.A.T. I'm moving my hands, I'm fidgeting, I'm blinking, I'm talking. Those things burn calories. Believe it or not, they actually add up to more of your total daily energy expenditure than anything else outside of your BMR. So your BMR is just what it takes to survive. Everything else are things like N.E.A.T or TEF, thermic effective food, so how many calories we burn actually eating. EAT, exercise activity thermogenesis, how much actual calories we burn through activity and exercise intentionally, all of those things. N.E.A.T actually burns more than that, and it takes the biggest hit during metabolic adaptation, which is the 2 reasons why we want to focus on N.E.A.T during a fat loss phase. So what we want to do with this is pretty simple. We want to increase our N.E.A.T as we go into a deficit. The reason we want to do this is because metabolic adaptation occurs shortly after we go into a calorie deficit. When we lower our calories, our body begins to compensate. And when it compensates, it lowers N.E.A.T first and foremost. In fact, the greatest impact seen inside of metabolic adaptation is with N.E.A.T, which means that when you start to reduce your calories and you're taking in less energy, your body will naturally and subconsciously move less, stand less, talk less, fidget less, blink less, really do everything less. And all of those things add up to the biggest caloric expenditure outside of BMR within our TDE. So how can we control that to our best ability? We can track our steps. Because the truth is you're not going to be able to consciously be aware of how much you blink or fidget or talk or things like that. However, you can be actively trying to park a little further away, take the stairs instead of the elevator, keep going and getting the mail every day, walk your dog more often. And you can do those things by tracking your step count and making sure that you're hitting a bare minimum. So my advice here is pretty simple. When you first go into the diet, you should be tracking your steps prior to starting a deficit. This is going to allow you to get your baseline step count. The reason you want your baseline step count is because we know it's going to drop as soon as you go into a calorie deficit or shortly after that deficit starts. So the best way to counteract that is to increase it slightly. The reason we increase it slightly is because we know other factors like blinking and standing and talking are also going to go down, and we can't really control those. So the best way to make sure that our N.E.A.T doesn't lower as we go into a calorie deficit is going to be to bump it up a little bit. So if we're already doing 10K steps a day, maybe you start your deficit and you immediately bump up to 11 or 12. Just add 1 to 2,000 steps per day. You probably will have to walk your dog a little bit further, maybe take a couple extra walks throughout the day, but the point is simple. We bump it up just a little bit and it counteracts some of that metabolic adaptation occurring, and you will continue burning calories. And this actually makes the deficit more effective. Most people don't see the effects of a diet because they go into a small deficit and their body starts to compensate. So the compensatory mechanisms actually stop them from seeing the fat loss that they're trying to achieve. If we bump up those steps a little bit, it will counteract that effect. So we want to rely on N.E.A.T more than anything. And as we progress through the diet, we may want to bump up that N.E.A.T even more to allow allow ourselves to burn more calories as the diet progresses. Now we have basically the perfect formula for fat loss. We create a calorie deficit, we rely on the diet to do the work, we implement a training program at a slightly lower volume and intensity if needed to make sure that we're just maintaining strength and muscle as we diet. Then we implement N.E.A.T because it is a big portion of our total daily energy expenditure, and we can manipulate it to burn more calories per day while avoiding stress overwhelm because it's extremely easy on our body to recover from. This formula works. We might not have to add anything. However, there is a time and a place to add cardio, and I know that's a lot of where people's minds tend to go because cardio is the fat loss protocol. It's the fat loss training, and it does burn a lot of calories. However, what we also know is that your body will adapt to cardio. So the way I like to create an analogy around this is pretty simple. As a human being, we are a gas guzzler. When we go to do cardio, it is tiring and we burn a lot of calories doing it. However, if we keep doing that same exact cardio day after day after day or week after week after week, eventually we go from being a gas guzzler to a hybrid. And what do hybrids do? They are efficient with fuel, so they save energy. And what that means is that you are efficient with your fuel when you're doing that cardio. In other words, you get really good at it and you burn less calories doing that cardio. And this is just part of metabolic adaptation from a cardio perspective. So how do we avoid this? Well, number one, we don't rely on cardio and we don't rely on long periods of cardio. In fact, we use cardio as a tool sparingly because when we use it intermittently for short periods of time, it actually works really good. So what I recommend doing is waiting until the tail end of a diet. If you are getting close to the finale, so to speak, of your diet and you just have a little bit of fat to lose, you have stubborn body fat left, you are in that 5 to 15 pound range, maybe 10 pounds or less, but you're at the end of your journey. You've been dieting for 8 to 12 weeks already and you just want to finish strong, add cardio in and add a good amount. There's nothing wrong with that. It is going to require energy, so you will start to press on that recovery a little bit harder, which is fine because you can do it for a little bit. And you're probably going to want to switch the modalities of cardio that you're doing to prevent joint pain and to prevent adaptation. And the way I do this is pretty simple. Number one, it's not proven by science, but I have found it very effective and there's no research on this idea so far. And it's to switch the modality you use every couple weeks. So week 1 and 2, maybe you do incline walking treadmill for 30 to 40 minutes, 3 to 4 days a week. And you burn a lot of calories doing that. But after a couple weeks, maybe you switch it up and you do the bike. And then after a couple weeks, you do the elliptical. Or maybe you switch it every week because you're only doing it for a 4-week period. Either way, we are changing the modality to continually make it harder on ourselves essentially and avoid becoming that hybrid. In my experience, this works really well to not only keep the mind engaged in the cardio, but also to keep burning a lot of calories. And the second way is to choose exercises that do not harm the joints or negatively impact your training in the gym, because that training in the gym is still just as important, if not more important, especially for maintaining muscle. So the best way to do this is pick non-eccentric loading exercises or non-overload exercises. And we can do this by choosing things like the sled or the bike or even the elliptical that eliminate the tension on joints or eliminate the eccentric phase. So when we have an eccentric phase of the movement, that's where we're seeing a lot more muscle damage. So if we run a lot, it's a lot of impact on the joints and it's a lot of downward motion and eccentric lifting, so to speak, and resistance on the muscles. We will be sore from that. But on the sled or the bike, there is literally zero eccentric movement. It's all concentric, which is actually good because it's easier on our joints and it's easier to recover from. So to conclude this topic in this video, it's a pretty simple formula. I think the problem with most people is that they're not patient enough. The truth is, to lose stubborn body fat and to really get a lean physique, it just requires time. But what we do know based on research and on the experience of working with thousands of people at our company, it's that diet is the biggest lever. That's the lever we want to lean on. That's the main thing we want to use for fat loss. Training is going to be the lever to maintain and preserve that hard-earned muscle and that strength that we have earned before we were dieting. Next, we have N.E.A.T. That's going to be a lifestyle-based activity that we can manipulate with low stress requirements and still burn a lot of calories and try to mitigate or avoid as much metabolic adaptation as we can, even though we can't completely avoid it. And then last but not least, if necessary, we add cardio in at the tail end. And the reason we do that is because your body does adapt to that. And studies do show that people who do a lot of cardio have a lower BMR. And this is obvious. Your body has a compensatory mechanism to avoid burning calories elsewhere when we start implementing a lot of cardio. So what we do is we add that at the tail end, we use it as a sparing tool, and we do so by implementing exercise that are safe on the joints, don't negatively impact your training, and that we can change in and out as the weeks go on. So if you put all these together, you have yourself an easy 12 to 24 week plan to lose a lot of fat consistently week after week. All right, guys, if you liked the video, do me a huge favor one more time. Like the video so that the algorithm enjoys this video on the feed, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. That way you can see every single video we upload, which is gonna be twice a week for you. Last but not least, leave a comment if you have anything for me. I would love to help you personally, and I will be in the comment section below. We'll catch you guys next time.